So the Las Vegas Aces have lost basically their entire team. Almost their entire team is gone from last year. They've lost
A.A. Wilson is under more pressure than ever as the Las Vegas Aces are disintegrating. Imagine winning back-to-back WNBA titles and then watching your teammates depart one by one.
If we want to look at the Vegas Aces team from last year, who's still remaining? The MVP? Jackie Young, Chelsea Gray.
If we take a look at the Vegas Aces team from the previous season, who still have players like Jackie Young, Chelsea Gray as MVP, we can see that it's not just a few players, key players, and even coaching staff are leaving the team. But why are players choosing to leave a championship-winning team for the Indiana Fever and Caitlin Clark? What's going on behind the scenes that's sending everyone packing? In this video, we're breaking it all down, from the shocking departures to what this means for the Aces and Wilson's future. Let's begin.
We gotta talk about the Aces, who are left with a shell of a roster right now. They have to fill out every other spot. They have a not top 5 roster in the W, and they have to fill out every other spot.
A.A. Wilson never imagined that her team, the Las Vegas Aces, would be disintegrating in front of her eyes. The previous 2 seasons had been a dream back-to-back championship, a stacked roster, and a city that welcomed them as heroes. But now she was left stranded in what used to be the most dominant WNBA team as her teammates were leaving one by one.
I mean, obviously we have to get better. We have to really take a sharp look at ourselves, look ourselves in the mirror, see our shortcomings, and then, you got to make the moves necessary, whatever that means, to put the best product that we possibly can. It's not going to be the same group probably next year.
The withdrawals first appeared to be minor losses. Teams rotate annually, and it's common for players to look for other alternatives after a championship run. However, the big nom began leaving, first with Kelsey Plum, then with Alicia Clark, and finally with Sydney Colson. The exodus was in full swing, and Wilson could only watch helplessly as her championship team collapsed in front of her eyes. Tiffany Hayes, and even the coaching staff, felt the change. The whole Aces fan base couldn't believe this was possible. How could a team go from being at the top of the league to complete chaos in a matter of months? The answer wasn't straightforward. It was a result of a number of factors, including bad management, dubious contracts, a poisonous atmosphere, and the growing popularity of other teams, particularly the Indiana Fever. The Aces had established a reputation as a dominant team during the previous few seasons. The front office began making decisions based on past performance rather than future sustainability, and before anyone realized it, the foundation of their dynasty had cracks too deep to ignore. The issue began with the roster itself. On paper, the Aces still had their core A.A. force, perhaps even arrogant, played with an attitude that screamed they were unbeatable, and for a while they were. Wilson, the loss of Kelsey Plum was a devastating blow. She wasn't just a scorer, but also a leader who brought energy to the team and a presence that couldn't be easily replaced. Her departure for the Sparks was the first real indication that something was amiss. Players don't just leave championship teams unless there's a serious reason. Chelsea Gray and Jackie Young should have been enough to keep the team competitive, but they didn't account for how much they were losing in depth. The loss of Alicia Clark, a defensive anchor, seasoned player with championship experience, and player who kept teams balanced, to the Seattle Storm felt like a direct blow. Sydney Colson and Tiffany Hayes then packed their bags and left for teams that were either rebuilding or setting themselves up for a deep playoff run. The worst part was that they were handcuffed since they were powerless to stop the pay cap issues. Chelsea Gray Wilson, Jackie Young, and Wilson all had large salaries, so the Aces made the dubious decision to sign Joel Lloyd to a near-max deal. On paper, adding Lloyd seemed like a smart plan, but they ultimately failed to find a way to balance the squad. She was a seasoned scorer with expertise who might relieve Wilson of some of the scoring load, but her inconsistency was the main issue. The players saw the writing on the wall when they realized that the front office was giving priority to certain contracts over team depth, that the once dominant team was no longer set up for long-term success, that Lloyd's shooting percentages had been inconsistent, her performances were unpredictable, and now that her huge contract was on the books, the Aces were unable to offer competitive deals to the role. Players who had been the foundation of their success. More significantly, they realized that there were better opportunities elsewhere. The state of Indiana Fever was a struggling team, but the arrival of Caitlin Clark changed everything. The hype surrounding Clark was unlike anything the WNBA had seen in years. She wasn't just a promising young player, she was a potential generational player. For many of these former Aces players, Fever became the unexpected destination. It wasn't just about money, it wasn't even about a fresh start, it was about the future. Talent is a franchise-changing star, and as Indiana aggressively surrounded her, the players noticed and began to follow her cunning actions. Howard, Natasha, Dananna Boner, Sophie Cunningham all made important discoveries, and the Fever wasn't only trying to get better, they wanted to win. Formerly considering the Aces to be the league's top destination, players were now focusing on Indiana as a. Wilson couldn't believe it. She had spent years helping to turn the ES into a powerhouse, and now everything was falling apart. At first, the rumors about Becky Hammond were subtle. Some players weren't happy with the way the team was being run, and there were rumors that her coaching style wasn't working for them. However, now that things were falling apart, those worries were emerging. Was Hammond too demanding? Was she unwilling to change? Did she alienate some players? The players weren't just leaving for better opportunities or more money. They were leaving because something wasn't working in Vegas. Even team owner Tom Brady had to be worried when he invested in the Aces because he had envisioned a dynasty, a powerhouse that would dominate for years. But now his team was barely hanging on. The turning point occurred when it was revealed that Wilson's contract was about to expire. She was more than simply a player. She was the team's spokesperson. It was one thing to lose role players, but losing Wilson would be the ultimate collapse. The front office frantically tried to reassure fans that everything was under control, talking about retooling, making adjustments, and finding ways to keep the team competitive. But the reality was much harsher. The Aces had already lost too much. The Indiana Fever were rising. The New York Liberty were already stacked. The Minnesota Lynx were acting aggressively. The league was changing. And Las Vegas was no longer the top destination for players looking to win. Wilson was aware that she had to choose between staying and trying to keep the Aces competitive by rebuilding from the ground up, or leaving and joining a team that was creating something unique, one that was ready for the future, and one where she wouldn't have to bear the burden of an entire franchise by herself as more players kept leaving the Aces. Wilson could not deny the idea that her time in Vegas was running up, and if she departed, it would be the last nail in the coffin for the Las Vegas Aces, not just the end of an era. Wilson was aware that she needed to make a decision, and it was becoming more difficult for her to ignore the fact that AA was staring her in the face every day. This wasn't just another off SE. This was the one that would determine the fate of the Las Vegas Aces, her career, and the legacy she had created. Wilson sat in her car parked outside the AC's practice facility, squeezing the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles became white. The lineup appeared unrecognizable. The departures had continued, and the rumors concerning Becky Ham had changed from murmurs to shouts. Wilson hadn't been naive. She knew basketball was a business, but this was something different. The Indiana Fever had become the league's most talked about team, and it wasn't just because of Caitlin Clark that players weren't choosing Indiana because they wanted to play with Clark. They were choosing stability and long-term success. Every morning, she woke up to another bombshell, another player leaving, another deal falling apart, another analyst wondering whether the Aces were done as a dynasty. A listening front desk, and the Aces were starting to resemble a sinking ship. She heard it repeatedly, and the worst part was that she couldn't blame them. She had tried to convince herself that it wasn't that bad, that Becky Hammond and the front office had a plan, that the Aces weren't just letting their championship team crumble without some kind of backup plan, but then she saw the numbers. Wilson had spent the last few days calling former teammates to check in and try to understand why so many of them were leaving, and the answers all started to sound the same. I just needed a fresh start. It wasn't personal, Azza, but things are different now, and I can't stay and hope things get better. I need to bet on myself. The salary cap situation was a disaster. They had too much money tied up in too few players, and the worst part, the one player they had spent big on, Jewel Lloyd, was not the answer. Lloyd was talented, no doubt, but she wasn't the kind of player who could carry a franchise, and now with her massive contract taking up space, the Aces were left scrambling to fill their bench with minimum contracts and rookies. That wasn't how you built a dynasty, that was how you destroyed one. The biggest red flag, though. Becky Hammond's silence for weeks as players kept leaving as the fan base started to panic. Hammond had stayed quiet, no big public reassurances, no press conferences explaining the plan, just vague comments about how change was inevitable and how they'd figured out. Wilson didn't buy it. She knew, and a team was in denial, and right now the Aces were drowning in it. She thought back to the Tom Brady situation. The guy had invested in this team thinking he was buying into a dynasty, but now he had to be wondering what the hell he had gotten himself into. The lawsuits, investigations, and contract disputes hanging over the franchise weren't helping either. Between the salary cap mess and the way the front office had handled player negotiations, the Aces had put themselves in a no-win situation. They couldn't afford to pay the players they needed, and the ones they could afford, they weren't sticking around. Wilson had spent the last 2 years carrying this team. She was supposed to be the face of the franchise, the leader, the one who stuck around no matter what, but now she was starting to wonder if she was the one being left behind, and then the reality hit her. She was about to become a free agent. She had one more season left on her contract, but after seeing how the front office had allowed everything to fall apart, she had to ask herself why she should stay. She had given her all to this team, led them to 2 championships, and established herself as one of the league's best players. But did she owe loyalty to a team that had failed to protect the roster? Loyalty to a coach who refused to adapt? Loyalty to a team that couldn't keep its own players happy? She knew what people would say if she left the ship. She couldn't handle the pressure. But was it pressure, or was it just common sense? She had witnessed what the Indiana Fever were doing, and Caitlin Clark was about to change the league. The Indiana Fever weren't just assembling a team, they were creating a dynasty. Dananna Boner and Natasha Howard, Sophie Cunningham, and now Sydney Carlson. That was a team with a vision. That was a team that wasn't just hoping to win, they were planning for it. And Wilson, she had to ask herself the toughest question of her career. Did she want to stick it out in Las Vegas, hoping the front office figured things out? Or did she want to take control of her own future? She had always thought of herself as a loyal player, someone who would ride with her team no matter what, but at some point loyalty had to go both ways, and right now it felt like the Aces had already moved on, whether they realized it or not. That night, Wilson lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzing every few minutes with texts from teammates, reporters, and fans begging for answers. She didn't have any. For the first time in her career, she didn't know what the right move was. She had spent years thinking she'd retire as an Ace, that she'd bring more championships to the city, that she'd finish what she started, but now she wasn't so sure. And as more players continued to leave, as Indiana and other teams continued to stack their rosters, as Becky Hammond continued to say nothing, the decision started to feel clearer. The Las Vegas Aces have gone from being a WNBA powerhouse to a team on the verge of collapse. Their players are gone, their coaching situation is precarious, and even their biggest star, A.A. Wilson, may be leaving soon. What do you think? Is this the end of the Las Vegas Aces dynasty? If Wilson leaves, where should she go next? Perhaps the Las Vegas Aces weren't her future after all. Leave a comment below with your ideas. And if you liked this analysis, click the like button to subscribe to the channel and enable notifications so you don't miss any WNBA news. We'll be following this story throughout the season, so check back for more. Till next time, continue to observe and debate, and we'll see you at the next one.